Greetings, citizens, and welcome to Unknown.
I'm Jason McClellan. Thanks for hanging out with me. I know it's been a while since our last episode. Life's been busy. It tends to get that way. And I know we're almost at the end of this strange year, so I certainly wanted to get another episode out to you all before then. And we've got a fun UFO photo to talk about. So let's get to it. On December 2nd, the newly launched media outlet, The Debrief, published an article titled Fast Movers and Transmedium Vehicles, the Pentagon's Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force. The article reveals that 2 classified intelligence reports on UFOs have reportedly been widely distributed to the U.S. intelligence community during the past couple years, and the reports reportedly contain clear photos of UFOs. A day after this article came out, The Debrief published a follow-up article that included one of these UFO photos, allegedly leaked by someone who would have received the intelligence report. The article's author, Tim McClellan, describes, quote, "While details are difficult to make out, the image appears to depict an inverted bell-shaped object, which is not readily identifiable given the photo's context. The object appears to possess ridges or other protrusions along its lateral edges extending toward its base," end quote. Tim also clarifies that this photo is the one described in the December 2nd article as showing a cube-shaped object. That initial article described, quote, "The Debrief was told that the accompanying photo was captured from within the cockpit of an FA-18 fighter jet with the pilot's personal cell phone. According to 3 U.S. officials who had seen it, the photo showed an unidentified silver cube-shaped object. The report is said to have indicated that the object was hovering or completely motionless when military pilots encountered it. All 3 officials agreed that based on the photo, the object appeared to be at an altitude of roughly 30,000 to 35,000 feet and approximately 1,000 feet from the fighter jet," end quote. Naturally, and understandably, the emergence of this photo caused a stir in the UFO community, and as these things do, we're seeing mainstream media outlets around the world reporting on this as well. As they should. We've got a photo, allegedly from official sources, showing an object photographed from a fighter jet that the intelligence community views as an unidentified flying object, or unidentified aerial phenomena. That's always cool, and it's newsworthy. Although it's common knowledge to UFO researchers that pilots see weird things in the sky all the time, it's not necessarily something the general public is aware of. And I will add that I trust the reporting and verification of details by Tim McClellan, the author of these articles on The Debrief. Yes, I do consider Tim a friend, but he is an amazing journalist and researcher. The level of digging and follow-up he's done related to this story is awesome. Alright, let's briefly talk about this photo. First of all, it is a bit confusing that the object in this photo was described by officials who had seen the photo as cube-shaped. What we see in the photo is no cube. It's more like an inverted pyramid, or as McClellan describes, an inverted bell-shaped object. And as he also pointed out, details are difficult to make out. Frankly, I'm surprised by the amount of detail that does exist in this photo. I mean, it was taken with a cell phone, through cockpit glass, 1,000 feet away, while the jet was tearing through the sky. Seriously, F-18s cruise at faster than 600 miles per hour, and this UFO was reportedly stationary. So the fact that there's any detail at all to look at with this UFO in the photo is pretty amazing. This UFO photo has apparently been floating around the internet since May of this year, and it's allegedly been in the possession of other individuals since late 2019. But since The Debrief published the photo, along with additional details about the incident itself, the photo is everywhere now. So what does this photo give us? Does it provide proof of extraterrestrial visitors or some unknown phenomena? Almost as soon as it was published, internet sleuths confidently proclaimed they had solved the puzzle. The answer? A Mylar balloon, possibly a Batman balloon. The apparent shape of the object in the photo is seemingly a perfect match to the shape of a Batman balloon after all. But is that a realistic possible explanation? Can a balloon really get up that high? I spoke with Dr. Chris Cogswell of the Mad Scientist podcast about that.
This sort of plays into an overall view I've held basically since the beginning of getting involved in this, which is that the military, for the most part, and the government for the most part, not just the military, but sort of the overall, I guess, military-industrial complex, including companies, but also the government itself kind of as a whole and the world governments as a whole, I don't really think have much more knowledge about this phenomena than we do. And if they do have more info, I think it's probably mostly of the sort that the debrief put out there, which are these weird cases of pilots or service members or government people having weird encounters, not knowing what's going on, and then, getting video or getting images or whatever. But I doubt very much, first off, that, in this world or in the day that we live today, where, you can Photoshop a person's head onto anything, it doesn't appear to me that a photo is ever going to be like the conclusive proof. And even video is becoming less and less sort of singular in its ability to kind of cut through the noise and be the truth and everything else. So when I saw the photo, the first thing I thought, frankly, was it looked like a lot of photos anyone who's investigated things in this field had seen before. The only difference between this photo and a photo you might send into MUFON was that this one appeared to be taken from the cockpit of a plane. And, I think people have this view that, fighter pilots or people in the military or whatever are going to be these, super soldiers. They know everything and they never get tricked by anybody. And, and that's just not true. They're just people. And so the fact that they're making potentially reports that are sort of don't hold up to scrutiny past an hour on Twitter, that's not that surprising to me. They're people. They're just people. And just because they chose to be really, really good at one specific thing doesn't mean they're experts in everything. People I have a doctorate in chemical engineering, and yet people still will ask me to come on shows and talk about all kinds of crazy science stuff that I just have no background on. I know less about bioengineering than, a high school student probably today does, because they're taught more than I was taught when I was in high school, and I haven't taken a biology course since then. So I think it's the same thing here. People assume that, every case that gets reported to the military, every case that gets reported to the government, every sighting is going to be, X-Files level, like, this is amazing. That was never going to be the case. So it's actually really interesting. So when I first saw the picture, legitimately the first thing I did was Google Batman balloon, because there was a case from MUFON that was very similar to this, or I believe it was from MUFON. But these sorts of Mylar balloons are actually mistaken for UFOs all the time. I actually myself one time, when we were scouring through the databanks and looking at cases, I brought to my team and said, "Hey, I think this is really interesting. This is like a great photo. What the heck is this? This looks like something I would expect to be this looks better than any photo I've ever seen." And I'm not even kidding. Within 30 minutes, someone else on my team was like, "Dude, that is a Mylar balloon in the shape of an A." And I was like, "No, it's a triangular craft." And they were like, "No, it's not. It's the letter A." You need to watch Sesame Street more, Chris. Clearly I do. So, okay. So first off, the reason I even posit that is to say this this sort of event, like the fact again that someone would be, think about this, right? They are flying faster than any of us listening have ever traveled, probably. They are, not only are they traveling that speed, they're piloting the vehicle. And they suddenly see something they have never seen before in the sky. Because even if this was a balloon, it would be extremely rare for a balloon to have gotten to the heights that we think this plane was flying at. Most Mylar balloons, or most balloons generally, will pop before they reach kind of any higher than, say, like, I think, I was looking this up actually, the record for like a plastic helium balloon, or not a plastic, but a rubber helium balloon, is something like 1.6 kilometers, so about 1 mile. And that one was like surrounded by other balloons, so they kind of all rose together. Mylar balloons, on the other hand, can raise higher than that. The thing that really causes a balloon to stop rising is, first off, the pressure. The pressure causes it to become non-buoyant, so it just starts to fall, or it can't get any higher. And usually the balloons are destroyed, right? They either pop because the Mylar is weak in some point, and as the pressure changes, it changes the deformation of the plastic or the material, and it causes it to burst or pop. But really, there is no limit to kind of how high a balloon theoretically could go, besides, like, there is no more gas for it to float. There is no more gas for it to be buoyant with. So it's not impossible that it would be a balloon. I do think it would be, again, if it is a balloon, it would be a rare event. But so would it being a UAP. So would it being a UFO. And so you got to ask yourself, which one is more rare, it being a balloon or it being a UAP that just happens to really look like a balloon? And I think most people are going to come down on the side of saying this is more. It's more likely that this is a balloon, or this more likely that this is something known that was misidentified. Now, that being said, these are trained pilots. I mean, we don't know much more about the event either. In the article itself, the debrief mentions that it wasn't just the picture that was interesting. It was the data coming in from, the kind of the contextual data from the event as well. So, and supposedly the people analyzing this photo thought enough of it to conclude it probably wasn't a balloon. Now, we don't have all of that info, and we don't know, frankly, who the people are that are analyzing this. We don't know anything about that. But I do think that kind of the lesson to take from this, or one lesson to take from this, is, again, just because you think something is really great, there's a quote, or there's kind of an idea in the scientific world called publish or perish. And another way of kind of saying that is, if you do an experiment and you solve some huge problem, right? You find the cure for cancer. If you can't manage to then get that cure published or purchased by a company or get it out the door, you didn't really do it, right? Who cares then? Because you never exposed it to the world, so it can never do any good for anybody. I think there's a bit of a lesson here in that this photo looks, to one set of people maybe really extraordinary and really interesting, but to the public, it may go over like a lead balloon. It may not go over that well. And so it's, again, I think part of the problem of trying to think and trying to mold the message to say to the public, this is something really interesting, this is why, and then this is how we need to kind of put it out there. Like, I think the lesson here isn't that the quality of the data is necessarily bad, although I am not really blown away by the picture at all. You look at it and you think it's something misidentified. It's not really something interesting necessarily. But if it had that contextual data around it, maybe we'd be having a different conversation. Even the claim of it being potentially, say, like a Batman balloon, right? The reason people are saying that it might be a Batman balloon is because it looks like it has the general shape of that, right? I've seen another one, actually, it's funny, that says it looks a little bit more like Majora's Mask, which actually I agree with. And I hope that this is Nintendo telling us that we're getting a Majora's Mask remake for the Switch, or maybe a sequel, the best Zelda game, fight me. No, I mean, the beauty about this is that anyone at home can try to do this same test themselves, right? Obviously not while you're driving, but while someone else is driving you, try to take a photo of a faraway object try to get a clear photo of an object far away as you're moving. It is exceptionally difficult. It is not easy. And you're only moving maybe, say, at 30 miles per hour to 50 miles per hour. It is the idea that this photo, I'm actually I have no information on this. I have no insight on this at all. But I would actually be very surprised if what we're seeing is the only photo. First off, that's the first thing I'd say. I would imagine that if you saw something crazy in the sky and you thought enough to take a photo of it, you probably took more than one photo. So this is in context of the other photos, we might see something more interesting. It may not actually be just this kind of spiky object that's out there in the sight line. It might be those might be distortions of the pixels themselves of the image. Those might be artifacts from the upscaling of the object that we did to try to get a clear image of it. Those might just be it might just be the light hitting off of the object in a weird way, right? We are not used to seeing things in above cloud lighting. So the chances of us being able to say that is what X looks like, none of us really know because we're not up there all that often. So I guess all in all, it's potentially a photo of a photo, or even if we had the original photo, it's still going to be something we're looking at which is very far away, is hard to kind of parse through all of the noise and error that could have been introduced by the way we took the photo. And then on top of that, you have these other expectations on it. I would actually be surprised if you showed that to a group of 100 people and they had no prior knowledge to what it could be. I actually doubt very much that any of that group would come out and say that's probably like a kid's balloon. I think that came out only because the UFO community is so used to getting reports of UFOs that turn out to be kids' balloons, frankly. It's not something I don't think the public might think well, maybe this is a balloon or something, but I'm not sure that they would be as quick to determine what it was. On top of that, too, we do have to take into context the fact that this is a report coming from this is a report coming from an internal working group, supposedly, that is analyzing these sorts of pieces of data. So they might know more than we know, and it might actually be interesting. But I will say again that, think about the Vietnam War, right? This is kind of we're going on a long walk here, but during the Vietnam War, kind of atrocities and sort of the horror of the war itself, both for our people serving overseas and also the people of Vietnam, the horror of that war kind of was there from the very beginning. But the public didn't ask for change, really, until clear photos of kind of atrocities and gruesome horrors being inflicted on the Vietnamese people, and also wounded soldiers and dead soldiers started to make its way to the United States airwaves. The difference between something like an image being impactful and it actually causing social change in a way that is interesting, and it just being another piece of news that goes out there to the internet, I think it's a very fine line. It's it's like trying to capture lightning in a bottle. So this idea that, if something is enormous and important and horrible as war, or even say like COVID, like the thing we're living through now, if images and statistics and data around those events aren't enough to skew the public towards action, what hope is there for a photo of a blurry object? I think that it's sort of we are barking up the wrong tree, if we think that there will ever be a photo that makes disclosure happen. Even the idea that it would be something like the government coming out and saying, like, yeah, there's, yup, we've been talking to the UFOs. You know what I mean? I don't know if that is even going to necessarily be effective. That being said, though, I do think that the fact that a report like this exists, the fact that it came out of the government, is in itself interesting. And although I think for most people, the quality of the data that appears to be coming out of that group, at least the one that was leaked, appears to be kind of lackluster, and I think a lot of people are disappointed. At the same time, you have to also realize that this is why it's important to study what is actually in the skies. It's why it's important to know what things like this, known objects would look like. If there was a you can imagine it would take maybe an afternoon to set up an experiment if the Air Force or whoever was really taking this stuff seriously, for them to be able to say, was this actually a Mylar balloon? I'm going to go buy a Mylar balloon. I'll buy a dozen Mylar balloons, let's fly them up there, and let's see what you guys see. Does it look anything like what we're seeing? It's not a hard experiment. And it's not really even an experiment. It's just like a test. So I do think, I don't know. I understand people being kind of disappointed or like, what is going on? Like, what is this? But I don't know what people expected, I guess.
And because we're talking about a photo here, I reached out to my buddy Marc D'Antonio, the chief photo and video analyst for the Mutual UFO Network.
Well, when I first saw it, my first thought was, I bought a Mylar balloon from one of my kids that looked like that. So could this be one of those? And I started looking online, and I found many different, superhero shapes and stuff like that were this exact shape, right down to the wrinkles and puckers that you see on this object. So there's an old phrase that says, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, right? Well, in this particular case, I do want to caution that while I don't know everything, I do think that in this particular case, we can pretty safely assume that this object was likely one of these balloons. And these balloons can actually travel quite fast. They can travel up to 100 miles an hour if they get into the jet stream, and they could potentially get up there, as they rise, they'll expand and really become tight like a drum. This guy that I saw, it didn't look like it had done that. It looked like it was still at somewhat low altitude. My impression in looking at it was that, as I said earlier a moment ago, my impression looking at it was that it appeared to be a Mylar balloon. In fact, one of these specialty balloons, like a superhero type balloon or some other type of balloon that has that particular shape. Batman is popular for that particular shape, in fact. So, but, being the MUFON chief photo and video analyst, it's important to keep an open mind. So I started searching around to see if I could find a close representative of this balloon, and sure enough, they were all over. So it wasn't too hard to find. And because it was only a photo and not a video, there was nothing else that I could examine. I couldn't see movement paths or anything like that. I couldn't see any kind of changes to its shape if it morphed, as some things have been stated to do. So I just basically thought this, looks very much like a Mylar balloon, and I recognized that I could see the three-dimensional shape to it. And from the many years of studying these kinds of things, there are certain times when you look at something and say, oh, well, that's just a balloon. And you sound flippant. You sound arrogant. And so you have to excuse when someone does that who's been doing this for a long, long time. So although these things can surprise us, this particular one, unfortunately, did not surprise me. I felt from the very moment I looked at it that it might have been a Mylar balloon. I found plenty of examples online that indicate that's very likely just what it was. And I say very likely because, as a science guy, we can't always say it is. We have to recognize that we are not infallible. And it's that arrogance which I've always fought against in science, which is why I have an open mind about the UFO arena at all. A mylar balloon could probably go that height, whereas a latex balloon might not, because the latex balloons will leak the helium very much quicker than a mylar balloon. And in the intervening hours that it might take a latex balloon to climb to such an altitude, as it expands, that helium is getting out through those pores in the latex, because that's how it works. You know how it is. You have a helium balloon, next day it's on the ground. Hey, what happened to my balloon? Okay, it's because it's leaking through that barrier, the plastic barrier in the balloon, because helium is a very, very tiny atom. So when you have a mylar balloon, on the other hand, that's more impervious to helium leakage. It still happens, but much slower. So that would actually bolster the possibility that this is something at that altitude. And standing still, I don't doubt it. Compared to the F-18, if this thing was just going up in an air column, it wasn't, in a jet stream or something, then sure enough, it would relative to the F-18, it would look like it's standing still. It might have been rising at maybe a meter per second, but the F-18 wouldn't be able to determine that. If the photo was taken with a cell phone, one of the things you got to consider is that the pilot had time to take out his camera, take out his iPhone or his Android, whatever he had, one of the two, most likely iPhone, okay, and point it at the thing and snap a picture. Now, the fact that he could do that meant that he was traveling in very still, non-turbulent air. Kind of a clue that maybe that air mass the balloon was also traveling through was also still. If it's only 1,000 feet away, at 1,000 feet, you're going to see this type size mylar balloon, which is about 2 feet across by about 2.5 feet tall. Okay, and they come in a variety of shapes and sizes that way too. But this shape comes in about that size, and you can get them in various iterations of that. But at 1,000 feet, it would be a speck. So he's reporting stuff that it actually fits with it being a mylar balloon. So, as far as the sunlight, at 30,000 feet, you can still have cirrus clouds up above you, which will dull the light on it. And the cell phone may, if it didn't catch a direct sun glint, it might put it in shadow. Depends on the time of the day. What time of the day was it? Do you even know? I mean, was it noon? Or was it like 2, 3? Okay, yeah. So the sun could have been behind it, making it appear darker. And if it was in front of it, it would have been very bright. So clearly the light is coming from an angle that wasn't sympathetic to the photographer. Okay, trying to actually get a nice bright shot of it because the light was behind it or on top of it or whatever. So not knowing that data means we don't have enough information to judge that part of it. But the question really is, could one of these mylar balloons get up that high? And the answer, in my estimate, is yeah. I don't see why not. Because the mylar is going to be much more, like I told you, less susceptible to letting helium escape than latex balloons.
Of course, balloons can and do go extremely high in the sky. Weather balloons, research balloons, solar balloons, all sorts of balloons. Do we know for sure the object in this photo is a balloon? No, of course not. But it's a strong possibility, and it's the logical conclusion. And yes, without a positive identification, we can certainly entertain the possibility of more exotic explanations. But as with all UFO sightings, when you have a strong, likely explanation, it's pretty silly and pointless to try to force the extraterrestrial explanation in there. So, in the end, this new photo is just another to add to the decades worth of filing cabinets filled with UFO photos. It's great that the officials who were shown this photo found it compelling and or concerning. And maybe it'll be a catalyst to improve the government's current UFO efforts. But who knows? It could conceivably have the opposite effect. The fact that information is already leaking to the public from the Pentagon's recently formed UAP Task Force and or others in the intelligence community could be detrimental to the longevity of the project. Time will tell. it's almost guaranteed that we'll get more information and details in the near future about this photo and the second photo mentioned by the debrief that reportedly shows a new and extremely clear photograph of an unidentifiable triangular aircraft. So watch for that. And if you haven't done so already, I do encourage you to read the 2 articles about these photos at thedebrief.org. Well, citizens, that's going to do it for this episode. We've got some changes coming to this show in the new year. I'll tell you about those soon, I promise. You can find more episodes of Unknown on all the major podcast platforms. And you can always find this show and our other shows at rogueplanet.tv, because Unknown is a Rogue Planet production. rogueplanet.tv is your home for all the strange. This show is at Unknown UFO Pod on Twitter. I'm at Acentric on Twitter and Instagram. And you can always email me at jason@rogueplanet.tv. Thanks again for hanging out today. I'm Jason McClellan. Do us a favor, friends. Always treat the UFO subject with the cautious and responsible skepticism it deserves. Question everything. Have the courage to form your own opinions. Keep truth as the focus of your quest, even if the truth conflicts with your opinions. And, of course, stay strange.